Welcome back to another episode of the Startup Therapy Podcast. This is Ryan Rutan, joined as always by Wil Schroter, the founder and CEO of startups.com. Wil, there is no shortage of advice or people willing to give it and be helpful for founders. How often are founders engaging with this help or just asking for help in general? How often is that happening?
Like never. Dude, I don't get it. There's so much help out there. Like, why would you be asking for all of it all the time? What is happening?
I'm not sure, because we've built a business around this, of course, but people aren't just running and asking us. And it's funny because I'm sure you run into the same thing, but when I do start answering questions for people, they're like, it was this easy? All I had to do was ask you? Like, how many wishes do I get from you, Startup Genie? And I'm like, as many as you want. I've got another 15 minutes to ask away, right? And everybody's just so mind blown. That was the process.
It's unbelievable how much founders suck at asking for advice. And I would put it in two parts. One is just not asking for it at all. One is not even asking, okay? But the second part is, like you suggested, when they do ask, they're not that good at it. Either they're not aggressive, I don't mean that in a negative way, they're not complete enough about it, or it doesn't occur to them that they should keep asking questions.
Yeah. You know what? One of my favorite questions to ask back to a founder when they're asking me questions is, what do you really want to know that you're not asking me right now? And it's so hysterical. They'll be like, can I? Yeah, you can. That's what I'm here for. Because that's the thing, man. When you're starting to give advice, you don't want to answer the most banal, pathetic, run-of-the-mill question, right? Don't ask me something you can go Google. Ask me the thing that you think I know that nobody else knows so that I can tell you, because that's what I'm here for. That's what I want to do. Yeah, it's always funny to watch that moment happen.
I don't know about you, but I do know about you. In this case, I love asking questions. I love asking. In fact, tell you this, when my wife and I go out and we go like in a double date or something like that with another couple or a group of people, I always get scolded at the end of the night, okay? Always get scolded because she's, dude, you went a little too deep on the questions, right?
Yeah. Why were you interrogating them? Yeah.
I don't know. I think it generally works, right? I find that when I stop, the dinner conversations go nowhere or they're just really boring. I'm incapable of small talk, and anybody that's listening to this that knows me is probably nodding their head going, yeah, you go a little too deep too fast, right? And it's just because that's what interests me.
That's the thing. I've said this before. I'm like, I cannot ask those questions, and then I will be non-participatory in the conversation because I'm not going to talk about the weather again or how upset we are about the price of gas again. I don't give a shit about either of those things.
I'm an infinitely curious person, and if I'm not satiating my curiosities, I lose interest. And so it's, for me, asking those questions or digging in and asking for advice is something I do all the time as I'm in the process of building a house, right? So I'm on the phone this week with some of the contractors that are doing like excavation or they're doing like groundwork or whatever, or foundation. I'm asking a million questions, right? How long does it take concrete to cure? Exactly how far do you go down in the excavation? When you do, and we hit bedrock, what are our options there?
How does the temperature and relative humidity work with that? Right? Oops, I guess I did ask about the weather. Yeah.
But I guess what I'm saying is I'm dying to know all of these things. As a founder, I've found it as my job to ask lots of questions. And I think it's a muscle I've developed over time. But I got to say, man, when I first started off 30 years ago, I sucked at it. I didn't realize I had permission to do it.
You didn't realize you have permission. You don't know how to ask the right questions. You don't know how to ask the follow-ups. You don't know how to read the audience or ask the right people. There was that too. Like I spent a lot of time asking the wrong people the right questions, or the right people the wrong questions. Like it does take time to get it right. But fortunately, I think in both of our cases, we started doing it. Right? There's so many founders that I talk to them just like, who have you talked to about this? Have you reached out to a subject matter expert? They're like, no. Hey, did you talk to another founder who's done this before? No.
I was like, this concept that we talk about like in every workshop, every day of the week at startups.com, we say, ask a million questions. That's why you're here. That's why we're here, right? So people come to me and I run a pitch deck workshop where every week I'm sitting down with founders and explaining them how to build a pitch deck. And every time they send me their first copy and it is awful. Not their fault, by the way. Not their fault. That's just the nature of a first draft of anything. And I always ask them, I said, hey, have you looked at our videos? Have you looked at our courses, et cetera, that kind of walk through this? And most of the time they haven't yet, which is usually how I'm informing them that this exists. But here's my party line response to all of them, which is everything you're about to do with this pitch deck, and of course this applies to everything, has already been done before, right? There's actually nothing for you to discover as far as how to build a pitch deck. Now, what you put in your pitch deck, of course, is going to be specific. The mechanics of how to build a pitch deck that investors will love every time has been done a million times before, just not by you. Just not by you.
Not by you. That's it. There's going to be some adjustment and some nuance, but we don't need to think about, like, what if I printed it on circular paper? And say, all right, no, we don't need to think about that. Like, you don't need to think about this stuff, right? There's a template and a formula to follow here in terms of how you construct the information that goes on the slide. What do people react to? What do they not care? And yeah, that is always painful too. Like when you see a founder who you talk to and they're like, I spent 3 months building this thing out. You're like, did you look at how other people did this first? Or are you just playing three little pigs over there? Where you're like, let's figure out by a trial and error and not getting eaten by a wolf what the best housing material is. Let's not. Let's just ask somebody who's done this before, right?
Just 100%. I got to tell you, I learned this, I developed this muscle early on in my career, and I think it really helped save me. And I think for a lot of folks listening, this is their first time meeting a founder. I want you to hear this because I think this is going to be of particular import to what you're doing. Initially, I had this like complex, like I think everybody does, which is, hey, I don't know the answers. Now, what I would learn way too late in life is that no one has them. And that's actually part of what this is.
We're not making carbon copies of other businesses either. So yes, there is always going to be some aspect of unknown. And no matter who you ask, they're not going to have the answer to exactly what and how to build what you build, but they can give you the process to get there. They can answer some of the constituent parts and turn some variables into constants for you.
But also why you have to get good at asking questions, right? Why you have to look at everything and say, I don't know the answer and neither do you. And that's okay, right? But how do I find the formula for getting the answer? How do I find the recipe for whatever I'm about to do? And early in my career, when I was starting, I was really interested in every aspect of building a company. So for me, it wasn't just about, hey, I'm interested in design or I'm interested in marketing or I'm interested in coding. I was interested in all of them. Like I wanted to learn how to do all of them as best as I could. In the early days, and I know you went through this too, running your own agency, I did everything. I did the design of websites. I did the coding of websites. I did the marketing of websites. I did the sales of websites, like everything.
The accounting, the cleaning, the whole thing, right?
Everything. And honestly, and I loved it. Now, that's not for everybody. But here's what's interesting about that. Having gotten into so many disciplines, and then later getting into so many industries, I started to learn a little bit of a hack. And the hack was this. Everything is infinitely doable if you start at the smallest possible space to start, if you pick it off 1% at a time. And man, this would have been the most useful information when I was 19, when I was first starting, but damn do I use the hell out of it now.
You wouldn't have heard it at that point anyways, man. That's the thing. Some of this, the experience has to inform some of this.
Yeah, I also had no one around me that was even capable of providing that advice, but that's a whole other issue. But here's what's interesting. As I started to learn that, hey, everything's been done before, and it's actually not complicated. Now, to be fair, there are a handful of things that actually are complicated, require either a high IQ or a very specialized talent to be able to do. And I'll give you two examples on two ends of the spectrum. Creative is easy to understand, right? I can look at the history of creative in all its forms, art, whatever, and I can look at the tools of creative, think like Photoshop, right? But it won't make me a creative. I either have that skill or I don't, right? Going on the other end of things, when you talk about anything math related, right? There's a version where you can do basic stuff, and there's a version where you aren't built for it. Right? There's where you actually cap out.
Just like highly theoretical math. You're like, yeah, not for me.
You either have that muscle or you do not. That said, those are far ends of the spectrum, right? So for us, when we're thinking about what are all the things I can do in between, the answer is pretty much everything. The only difference is whether or not you sought out the mechanism, the recipe, the playbook, or how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, with most things, I think one of the really important things to understand there is for the broad majority of things, all those things in the middle between those 2 points in the spectrum, a little bit of knowledge goes a long way, right? Everything seems difficult as all hell when you have zero knowledge. The minute you learn a little bit and all of a sudden you have some basis, some foundation, right? So did I become the best accountant in the world? Clearly not, right? Was I more than capable of handling the accounting for the agency? Yes, I was. Did it require a little bit of work and knowledge? Yeah, a little. In the beginning, I was like, debit, credit, don't get it, whatever. Okay, book, a couple of hours of reading, got it. All right, now I know where to put shit. So it's about crossing some of those early knowledge gaps. But again, so many times, founders are not asking questions from those who have tread the path before. They're just literally trying to figure it out through trial and error as if there's some misguided belief that there's some honor in just figuring it out. I don't know. I don't know what it is. Like I've really never had a problem asking. Like when I don't know how to do something, like I'm an idiot. I don't know how to do this. How do I do this? And then I go find somebody who looks like less of an idiot than I am that is already doing it. I'm like, help me. And they're like, okay.
But I think it's a trained muscle. And what I'm saying too is I think when you train that muscle, it serves you in so many ways, right? But again, when we see founders for the first time, I think they're often coming from industries, and this isn't unusual, where saying I don't know doesn't get you a high five, right? You're fearful of the I don't know. And I think that's a dangerous proposition for people.
Vulnerability is bad and all those things. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tantamount to I don't know, I'm weak, whatever. And I've seen it from a different angle, which is finding out exactly where to find this information or how to ask those questions or really how to dig in became a bit of a superpower. Asking questions became a superpower. So let me explain, because Ryan, you've been on this journey with me. Years ago, I figured out how to be a carpenter. And this weekend, I sent you pictures, whatever. I just finished an entire kitchen for my new home, right? Kitchen, pantry, tons of stuff, right? All the cabinets, all the details, doors, everything, right? And people are like, how could you possibly know how to do that? Dude, I didn't, like anybody else, right? Specifically how this happened, I just want to point out how this thing builds. Years ago, specifically, when I was sitting in the delivery room for my son, Will, next to my wife, right? And waiting for him to come out, I'm on YouTube, basically because my wife and I are just sitting there. There's nothing going on at the time. And I end up stumbling upon a YouTube video, and I just think this is so funny, about some guy who's a carpenter. He's just teaching basic carpentry stuff. I don't know why I stumbled upon this video. I didn't even know what I was looking for at the time. But I found the video. He said 3 things that were like basic things about how to construct something so it comes out the way you want it to, right? And I was like, wait, that's it?
That's
like,
it. Yeah.
Huh?
Right.
And so,
contrast that with if you had just gone into a wood shop and started banging around and trying to figure out, which you did, right? And that but without those advice, like at how long would it have taken you? Would you have ever come to the same realization? Presumably, yes.
I know for sure, because I've been doing it for 30 years prior to that and didn't get that outcome. But this light bulb went off in me, and I was like, wait a minute. If this is as simple as this guy just made it, and it was, by the way, what else is this simple? And then all of a sudden, like something clicked inside me, not just about like carpentry, woodworking or whatever, just in my journey of learning, okay? And I realized that I could actually learn or do anything like Neo Matrix style, I know Kung Fu, if I just focused on the first 1% of it. It just so happened that coincided when I started the process a few years later building a house, right? And I was like, how hard could architecture actually be? How hard could 3D modeling be? How hard? And I was like, oh, damn, if I just pick off 1% of this problem, but ask about it, if I get awesome at asking questions, I can do anything. And holy cow, years later.
Again, there's so much information out there, and there's so much availability now to learn to do anything, right? You picked that up from a YouTube video, right? Which is a way of asking for help, right? You went out, you ran a search, right? And that is an expert, right? Are they talking specifically to you about your nuanced problem? No. And in a lot of cases, doesn't matter, right? Because the nuance is for you to figure out. The overall process, the 3 pieces of knowledge that he gave you that'll unlock this box for you so you could go build boxes, were something simple and general enough that now you can apply it to whatever you want to use it for. Right? I think that's the other challenge that founders run into, is that they're looking for these things that are too specific sometimes, right? They want to know exactly the answer to their thing. And you tell them, I don't know that, but here's exactly the formula for how else this was solved somewhere else. And then it's just incumbent on them to be able to say, okay, cool. Now I'll go apply that, right? As opposed to ignoring all advice that doesn't immediately match exactly the situation, which is something else I see all the time.
Something that's really funny about everything we talk about here is that none of it is new. Everything you're dealing with right now has been done 1,000 times before you, which means the answer already exists, you may just not know it, but that's okay. That's what we're here to do. We talk about this stuff on the show, but we actually solve these problems all day long at groups.startups.com. So if any of this sounds familiar, stop guessing about what to do. Let us just give you the answers to the test and be done with it.
The way I see it is, if you're going to cook something, look for a recipe. If you're like, no, I'm just going to go in the kitchen and just start mixing shit around and I'm going to see if something delicious. No, it's not going to pop up. And yes, over time, in the hardest way possible, you're going to eventually learn how to cook food, right? You're going to eventually learn. Why bother? All of the recipes that you could possibly need for building a startup already exist. We built an entire company at startups.com to store all of them, right? Whether you ask us or anybody else isn't the point. The point is that it's already out there. And if you're not using those recipes to go build your business, you're not only wasting time, you're putting your whole damn organization at risk. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. And look, we've talked about the fact that there are like some things you need to go through. There's necessitous grind and there's these things, but you want to be doing that grind on the most important possible things. You don't want to be doing the grind to figure out something that everybody else already knows, right? Guys, I spent the last 6 years on this crazy theory that we can use abstract containers to contain values that we could then combine. You mean addition?
Yeah.
What's that? That's where we take it. Yeah. You don't need to do that, right? Spend your time on the things that are actually going to add that nuanced value to your business, as opposed to just grinding away on the things that have already been solved. It's so painful to watch that happen.
What that looks like for you as a leader, right? The analogy would go, we're looking at a Sherpa that's going to take us through a mountain pass, right? This very trying mountain pass that could be life or death, right? And there's two Sherpas. One Sherpa's, hey, dude, I've got a map. It's going to be hard, right? But I actually know how to get through it because the map tells us how.
The other one's, I've got flip-flops and a lava lamp. Let's rock.
We'll figure it out as we go. Who would want to follow that guy, right? And we are the startup Sherpas. It is our job to find the damn map before we go through the mountain pass. So if we're building a pitch deck, going back to my earlier example, man, find out what the plan is. By the way, if you're building a pitch deck, the plan isn't go download a template. It's like saying, I want to write a book, so I'm going to download a book. This is not the way it works. There's a whole instruction manual for how to build pitch decks, right? You don't have to guess at a thing. It is like paint by numbers. Yes, what you put into your pitch deck specifically is going to be unique, but that's actually not where most people struggle. They don't even know what's supposed to be in it. They're like, oh, well, I read somewhere that it has to have these 12 slides. That doesn't tell you jack shit, right? Like, how specifically are they to be constructed? What's the objective of every slide? What does a perfect slide look like?
Yeah, that's like saying every painting needs to have these 6 colors, right? Cool.
Yeah, great. And don't make it a painting. And so I think for some reason, we have this default notion to go it alone, to go through the mountain pass without turning around and saying, hey, anybody got a map?
Yep. To me, that goes back to something you said earlier, man. It goes back to something you said earlier, where people are coming from another industry or career where that type of vulnerability and asking for help wasn't allowed. But it's also something gets coached into people as founders. We talked about this, I don't know, about 100 podcasts ago probably, but it was around this notion of like always having to be on, always in pitch mode, always having the answers. So I think that founders have this feeling that I have to be on. I have to know the answers. I'm the only one who's trying to figure this out. So I have to be the one who's figuring out. I should know more about this than anybody else. Ergo, asking anybody anything is a sign that I don't. Right. And it's a sad thing to see because it's, look, you do have to be on. You do have to have the answers in certain situations. Right. If you're pitching to investors, you probably ought to have the answers. Right. You want to know the answer to the questions they're going to ask. But if you're just trying to figure out like, hey, what's the best version of a MarTech stack for us based on the type of leads we want to go after and the type of conversions we have? Like, you don't need to go figure that out through trial and error, right? If you are a B2B company selling this type of price point to an audience in these locations, here's your MarTech stack, right? That's been figured out. Don't go reinvent the shit.
I think part of that is, you mentioned vulnerability, which I think is a really interesting term, because I do believe that's probably where it comes from, like this insecurity or vulnerability of asking. But I think maybe over like the 30 years of my career so far, I think part of the reason I've gotten so good at asking questions is because I burned off a lot of that like freshman year insecurity. And I think I just realized that kind of everybody has it, right? It's the same way, like if I were to go back to dating again, I would feel so much differently about it because all the insecurities I had about dating are gone now, having been married for what's about to be 13 years. And so I think part of that is, again, it's your freshman year. Everybody's going through it. Part of our job, Ryan, and part of our challenge, if you think about our platform, our community, and really our product, is convincing people, coaxing people to ask those questions really in many ways for the first time without feeling guilty about it, without feeling vulnerable.
Yeah, without feeling vulnerable and without feeling like they have to defend it. I just had this happen in one of my getting customers workshops, and somebody coming out of a corporate environment. So there's probably some of exactly what you said, which is that they were constantly having to defend their perspective, defend their ideas, defend their everything, right? You got to watch your own back all the time. Bring that into a founders group meeting with a bunch of other founders who are all just there to help. And yet every time a question was asked and someone would offer a piece of advice or perspective or something back, there was constant defensiveness. Oh, I've already thought of this, or I've already done that, or somebody told me something different than what you're telling me. What are you doing? You don't need to defend it. You just be vulnerable, listen to what they're saying, take it for what it's worth. You can disagree with it, whatever, but it's so funny because then it just shuts everybody down. So this person needs to practice that muscle a bit more, right? And most of us do. To your point, we all have that veneer, but you can see it clearly in this case where it was like, at some point, this individual will get over that, I hope, and they'll be able to just say, look, I don't have to feel like I'm being attacked just because people are asking me questions, because all they want to do is get information so they can answer my questions, right? So I think this imposed vulnerability is something we all have to practice. I think it's a muscle like any other, right? Where we're just okay being vulnerable. We're okay hanging ourselves out there, knowing that we may receive information that's not as comfortable as what we'd like, or it's not a direct answer, or people are pointing out holes in the armor, whatever, right? It's okay, right? It's okay to be vulnerable. You should be, because it opens the doors to a lot of vectors for learning that otherwise just aren't there.
I agree. You also said talking to a group of founders. If we're talking about who to ask these questions from, ask founders. Specifically go to founders, right? Because people are like, should I talk to an expert in this or an expert in that? And yes, by all means you should.
Yes, who's also a founder.
The reason we advocate for founders specifically is because they not only practice this stuff, they're very important, by the way. Like, they've had the consequences of getting this wrong, and the spoils of getting it right. The other side of it is they love helping other founders. That's like the secret gem, maybe, of this entire podcast. Founders love helping other founders, and if you're a new founder, if you haven't figured out like what this secret club looks like, where you can just say, hey, I'm a founder, and this massive world opens up to you, great news. It's available.
Yeah, for sure. Like you and I have built a business around this, right? We love helping founders so much, we decided to make this our full-time thing, right? It's all we do.
Yeah, and you were saying somebody was commenting to you the other day. They're like, hey, are you enjoying this? All the questions, right? What was that like for you?
Yeah, it was super funny. Yeah, it was super funny because we were talking about, I was encouraging her to go and talk to other founders in the space so that she could get some parallel experiences. And she's like, they answer the questions. Yeah, they will. And it's like, oh, they won't be bothered by it. They won't think I'm trying to compete with them. I was like, you're not competing with them. We already talked about the categories you can go and talk to that are completely non-competitive. It's a big market. They'll remember what it was like. And then somehow it got turned back around to, she said, you've been so generous with your time today. Thank you so much. I hope this wasn't a bother. I was like, I've enjoyed this. She's like, have you really? I was like, you've been on this call with me the entire time, right?
Yeah.
Did it look like I was enjoying myself? And she said, it looked like you were having the time of your life. And I said, that's because I was, right? I'm a shit actor, right? I'm a terrible actor. Watch some of the YouTube videos where I was trying to do like from a script. You'll see I'm a real shit actor. So if I look happy, I'm happy.
No, I agree, man. From my standpoint, it's funny to me that founders have access to countless the biggest depth of knowledge you could possibly have. And the first factor is they actually just don't know it. They're not aware of that. And again, why would you be until somebody tells you, right? So if you're listening, great news.
How many millennia did we stand on top of oil before we need to dig in the ground and pull it out and do something with it, right?
That's kind of what
it was there,
right?
The whole time.
So the first factor is folks don't even know that the help exists. Yep. Okay, fair. The second thing is they don't understand the motivation for why founders would want to help them, or anybody for that matter. So in many ways, they just don't ask. Let me make it simple. Founders love sharing with other founders because we've been through it before. We're basically sharing our own stuff, and the way that parents share things with kids, where they get to share their own experiences, etc. As a parent, generally speaking, you're not like, hey, son, I'm not going to tell you anything about life because that's my knowledge, not yours. It's the opposite. I can't wait to share with you all the things that I learned because you're going through the same things I went through. And the best parallel I've ever seen, I love when I catch moments like this, is when I see two military servicemen see each other at an airport or something like that, right? They don't know each other, but just somehow they pick up on the fact that they both served. And there's this amazing respect and camaraderie for two total strangers, right?
It's a celebration of what they did, right? It's a celebration and a recognition of what they did. And I think that's actually a great parallel. It's a big part of what we do. I realized this some time ago. Is one of the reasons I love sharing these little things, right? Because they're all little things in most cases. Like, we're not going to unlock. It's not like I have some golden secret that once I tell you, everything becomes simple, right? But I can unlock lots of the little doors that are going to block you from getting where you want to be. Each one of those, in my own experience, was probably a completely uncelebrated victory. Nobody high-fived the shit out of me because I figured out a way to bring CPM down by 5%, right? Mattered to me when I'm building my business. When I get to go and tell somebody else that, it's my first chance to celebrate this and to help somebody else. Like, how the hell does that not feel good, right? Everybody's going to want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a great justification. It helps validate your experience, right? I was going to say the other example that I always say, it's two moms in a supermarket where one kid is screaming bloody murder and the other mom just looks at her and they just nod. They're like, yep, been there. Yeah. They don't exchange a word. They just know at that moment that they've both been through the same shit. And I think among founders, we have that amazing camaraderie among us. Last Friday, we were doing one of our community leader meetings, which for those listening, folks that are in the startups.com platform that want to specifically give back to lots of other startups, they run their own meetings, their own workshops, and they just want to help other startups. And they were talking about this. And one of the new founders that had joined was saying, I've been wanting to share this information for so long, but here's what's interesting. I've never had an outlet. I met a couple people here and there and they were interesting, but now I've got like thousands of people that I have access to that I can share the exact stuff that I've gone through with. And it's awesome. And it's making me laugh because I was like, think of how opposite that is from everybody that's going to ask him for so much information. To your point, they're like, oh my God, am I bothering him? Whatever. And he's thinking the opposite. He's, oh my God, I'm in my happiest zone right now because I can help all these people with all this stuff.
Stick on that for a second because I think it's super important, right? People who've decided to go and like specifically hang a shingle and help other folks, right? Do that, right? At whatever stage you're at as a founder, make it apparent that you're open to this, right? This is the biggest gift that you can give yourself and the rest of the community is to make yourself available, right? You and I both do this all the time. We're constantly asking like, how can I be helpful? Sometimes that's just when people come to us. I've started doing a thing like regularly on LinkedIn. I'll just pop it out there like, who needs help right now? And I literally mean that. Just come and ask me, right? Just put it out there. Let people know that you have something to share. How sad is it? Happy now that this founder found that outlet and now knows that they have a way to share this information. But to your point, it wouldn't have been hard, right? It's like opening up a stand that says free ice cream, right? I've been waiting for years to figure out how I could get rid of all this ice cream that I have. I want to share my ice cream with the world. Tell people you got ice cream, guess what? They're going to fucking show up, right? It happens every time. You tell them, I have advice. I've fought this battle. I know how to beat Mike Tyson in Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. Cool. What is it? Here it is. We want to share these things.
Yeah, dude. And I think that, again, from our standpoint, Ryan, you and I help people out for a living and we're used to it. But day after day, as we have people join the platform and they come to their first workshop or they come to their first one-on-one with us or something like that, and they clearly haven't gotten used to asking for advice. And it doesn't matter how old they are. In fact, sometimes the older they are, the worse it is because they've been more conditioned for not asking for advice. And I'm like, listen, you're in a place right now in your career where you are highly penalized every time you don't ask a question, right? Your job, literally your job right now is to ask a million questions. It's kind of, Ryan, we're in the business of asking questions, the nature of product invention, market adoption, et cetera.
That's it, man. We're just validating everything, right? Everything is an unknown until it's not. And that's our job, is to make all the unknowns knowns and carve the path forward.
Agreed. So here's what I would say. Generally speaking, for founders, there is no excuse whatsoever for not asking for help, for not reaching out, talking to as many people as possible, finding the recipes, finding the map, being the Sherpa with the map, not being the Sherpa, figuring it out as they go. We have many jobs as founders. We have many responsibilities. There's no way we're going to do all of them flawlessly with no input, no feedback, and no direction. So if we're going to do anything right, we need to be amazing at seeking out help and asking tons of questions.
Overthinking your startup because you're going it alone? You don't have to, and honestly, you shouldn't, because instead, you can learn directly from peers who've been in your shoes. Connect with bootstrapped founders and the advisors helping them win in the startups.com community. Check out the startups.com community at www.startups.com to see if it's for you. Could be just the thing you need. I hope to see you inside.